Welcome aboard to this episode of 3 Levels Deep, where we go deeper and deeper into interesting topics that you're going to spend time listening about. I'm Sean.
Who the fuck was that?
I'm Sean.
He returns.
Sorry. Are you on the right podcast there? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think we've met before, Sean. Nice to meet you. I'm Matt.
And I'm Santo.
And I'm Alex. Yeah, so today we've got a bit of a grab bag podcast. We're going to talk about some stuff we've been playing. There's a new Monster Rancher game Santo's going to share with us. He's cringing.
Well, great. See, this is what happens when we can see each other.
Yeah.
Get all this body language going.
All his body language. Yeah, that the viewer doesn't get. That's why we need the commentary.
Yeah.
We're here for you, viewer that's viewing this audio recording.
You can see the lines. But that's not the only game I want to talk about. I also want to talk about Vampire Survivors, because I started playing that since it went 1.0, and I've spent like 35 hours in it, so it's good.
Yeah.
It's like it's not really a twin stick shooter because you only use one stick or the arrow keys. You don't choose which direction you shoot. Some of your weapons shoot in the direction you're facing, but most of them just kind of have some kind of logic to them where they'll either shoot in a random direction or at the closest enemy or at everything in a certain area around you. So it's kind of more of a passive experience.
It's an avoidance stick shooter.
Up until your build gets insane and then you're just running at the enemies. It's really, really good. It's no surprise to me that this game blew up the way it did.
It's got some real discount art assets, but sometimes that's not what.
No, they look really good. I think I like the art.
Anyway, I've also I'm going to talk a bit about Shotgun King a bit later. Very inspired chess game.
To continue the theme of chess, I'm going to talk about regular chess and the crazy variants that come with it.
Are you just making this up on the spot, Sean?
No, I have a list.
I'm going to be talking about Save Room Organization Puzzle.
Save Room?
Yep.
Okay, is that just like two different like Resident Evil references right there?
It's basically Resident Evil 4 attaché case puzzle game.
Yeah, okay.
Fit everything into the attaché case.
Nice.
Oh, this is glorious. I'm looking forward to it, guys.
Yeah, so, Matt, why don't you start then with that?
All right. It's not like your typical attaché case where you've got the full thing. Like, it'll give you a limited amount of squares to work with, and you got to fit everything in there. There's 40 different stages. I blew through it in like about an hour and a half. Really fun though. So it introduces a bunch of mechanics as you go on. Like, in some cases, you have to make sure all the weapons are reloaded. So you'll have to make sure you put the ammo into them. In other situations, you have to make sure you're at full health. So there will be some healing items to use. But in some cases, there's healing items to use, but you're at full health. So there's actually some rotten items in there you can eat to take damage to then use the healing items.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
And it mechanically, like the last level, it takes a bit of everything you've learned, and it's a really good use of everything you've picked up on throughout the game. It's just a really simple concept, executed very well, and it's only like a couple bucks on Steam.
Nice. Yeah. On another game that I've played a little bit of that's quite similar is called Cats Organized Neatly, which is just a bunch of cats that look like, various Tetris pieces and bigger than Tetris pieces, like tangram kind of stuff, that you just rotate and try and place around, and they all meow. And there's a sequel called Dogs Organized Neatly as well.
Oh.
So if you're a cat person or a dog person, there's
both of those.
And like to organize.
I mean, Cats Organized Neatly, definitely somebody went pretty hard, either recording or doing a deep dive on selection of all of the cat sounds they could find. It's a very, very choice selection of cat sounds.
Yeah. It's very cute, very relaxing. But what is neither cute nor relaxing is Vampire Survivors. Because that game is stressful at times, but oddly zen at other times. It's a really big swing. Because, okay, I take a shot every time I compare this to 20 Minutes Till Dawn. So hopefully you don't take that many, because I don't think it should be compared to 20 Minutes Till Dawn very directly, even though they both came out this year. They both went through early access. They both have extremely similar concepts, and it could be argued that, 20 Minutes probably rips Vampire Survivors off, maybe. I don't know. But they're very different games, just because of what I said earlier about, in Vampire Survivors, you don't really shoot, necessarily. It's just movement. So, I like 20 Minutes Till Dawn more. I think the gameplay loop's a bit tighter in how what you're doing matters a little bit more throughout the run, because you have to shoot. So there's more impetus on you, the player, to actually, do skill-based things to get success. Whereas in Vampire Survivors, it's more about unlocking stuff, just doing runs, unlocking a few things every single time, and spending points into the passive buffs to your character that you can get to just kind of make your character better and better and better, unlock more and more things, and kind of get a handle on how some of the mechanics work. Like, if you level up your weapon enough times and have another passive item that combines with it, which the game doesn't tell you which items combine to which unless you do it once, they'll combine into a much more powerful version. And so, I feel like I actually got through a lot of the secret content quickly, because I discovered that weapons could combine very early, and I discovered some of the relics, which unlock additional features in the game quite early as well. So I feel like I had kind of more of a streamlined process than I probably should have for not having looked anything up. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting weapons, like things that bounce around the screen, things that one of my favorite ones is the King Bible, which just spawns Bibles that spin around your character, and as you level it up, it spawns more and more Bibles that spin faster and faster. And so they can oh, wow. It's pretty effective at just knocking enemies back too. It's quite good. And then when you get the combined version of that, they're spinning endlessly. They don't spawn, spin for a bit, and then despawn. So you constantly have Bible.
Yeah, so overall, a lot more about the meta progression than...
Yeah, and the game, really... The way it doles out the secrets and some of the stuff that they do up around unlocking the secrets, it's very clear that that's the meat of the game, and that's what the developer wanted. For example, there's these coffins in certain stages that you kind of have to find. It's not until you get the map that you can find them easily. And when you go to one and defeat the guardians around it, you unlock a new character, and it says your vampire is in another coffin. There's little references and stuff tied to unlocking that are pretty good. So, in my opinion, the runs go on a little bit long. They're 30-minute runs. And of course, then you got time spent, in the upgrade screen whenever you level up, which you level up a lot, choosing what you want to get. One other thing is that you have limited weapon and item slots, so you can't get everything in a run. You can get 6 weapons, 6 items, and there's a couple different ways to get more than that, but generally that's what you're kind of locked into.
Just on the upgrades, something I noticed is that it seemed like a lot of the upgrades were, frankly, they seemed kind of marginal. It's like, like 5% attack speed or something. In comparison to a game like 20 minutes, where like every upgrade is huge.
Well, the difference is that in 20 minutes, each like skill tree has 1, and then 2, and then 1. So each has 4, basically. Whereas most weapons in Vampire Survivors have 8 levels to them. So, like, yeah, each upgrade is more slight, but there's more of them. And then when they, like, evolve, that's, like, the equivalent of, like, a lot of upgrades for some of these. Some of these weapons are, like, kind of meh before they're evolved, and then become completely broken when they are.
Yeah, so, it just seemed like, like you were saying, the gameplay loop's just a bit not as tight. It felt like there was a bit more filler in some ways.
A little bit, yeah. Just the run's going a bit long, and then I found it a lot easier in Vampire Survivors to get to a point where you're untouchable. Where you can just sit still and just like do something else and wait for the run to end. So I still think it's quite good, and I still think it's well worth like $5 it is. Like, again, this is a game that I wish costed more because I want the developers to profit more off the good game that they made. But,
And it was even cheaper in early access.
Yeah. The developer put out like tweets being like, "Oh, I better get it now before we raise the price to $5 once it's released." It's like pretty funny.
I believe it's also on Game Pass.
Yeah, which is so weird. It's like that's on Game Pass. But... So I really wonder what kind of payout they got from Microsoft for that. Actually, like how that scaled to the because the release price is so little.
Well, and the other thing though is that the fact that it's on Game Pass might also drive sales on other platforms too, because a bunch of people are, I think, more willing to try out a game if they already have Game Pass.
Yeah,
and then
of
they
course.
talk about it. Like it would be interesting. Like it would be interesting to like see how like an indie game that's on Game Pass, how their sales are affected on Steam based on Game Pass availability. That actually seems like it should be publicly available data. 'Cause doesn't Steam publish sales data?
Not
Kind
really. You have to go through third-party stuff that may or may not work. Some of them.
Oh yeah.
Some of the stuff does, because when Steam made your game collection private by default, that screwed everything up for everybody that was scraping that data, because now they couldn't tell who had what games. So I think that's why in some of the like Steam Spy stuff you see like a range where they're like estimating, I think. So the sales numbers for those things, I don't think they're solid unless something else changed that I missed. But Microsoft probably publishes how many people are subscribed to Game Pass. I don't see why they wouldn't.
Yeah, but that doesn't really. No, I'm more thinking about, for an indie dev, is it worth it to release their game? And I notice most of them are only temporary. Many of them are only temporarily available on Game Pass. But does that actually give them, in addition to whatever payout Microsoft's giving them? And I don't know if that's based on how many people download it while it's on Game Pass. But I wonder, it seems like in some cases it might actually just spike sales on Steam anyway.
Yeah, so sounds pretty good. One other thing that I want to say about Vampire Survivors is that, okay, this game is what I want to see from advances in hardware. Because there is so much happening on screen at once. There's like hundreds of sprites moving around and like bouncing off each other and like some particle effects and stuff like that. Like this is what I want to see, because a lot of hardware advances now is just like, you know, polygon count and ray tracing, like higher res textures, but this is a game that couldn't run on computers well like 20 years ago for sure, maybe even 10 years ago, with how many sprites and stuff are bouncing around. So like it's weird to think about for a game that visually looks, you know, pixel arty and whatever, but this is what I want to see more of. I want to see more like crazy stuff. People like pushing hardware with these simpler graphics.
You know what's interesting about that too is that that's actually something that if you're doing things intelligently, that the hardware can actually scale well with. Like, for example, if you have more enemies on screen, your game logic has to calculate a lot more enemy movements and attack patterns and things like that. But if you're doing it on a per character basis, you can parallelize that. And that's obviously what modern hardware is actually letting us do now, because clock speeds aren't going up, but parallelization is getting really, really insane. And so that's the kind of thing that we actually can do, is just like pump huge numbers of enemies on screen, right? And you know what's funny is that I feel like the last generation where developers were really like talking about this and pushing this was actually like the GameCube, Xbox 360, or well, I remember on the GameCube, it was funny because Nintendo was actually the one, and they were talking about Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door and talking up how like, oh, we got hundreds of enemy sprites on screen at once, and they did this thing with like there was a few sections like there's like a million there's like 100 dry bones sprites or something, and then kind of with Pikmin actually that they kind of had the same sort of thing where they're talking about just like numbers, just big numbers of
that does happen like every now and then, like, you know, Dead Rising on the 360 certainly
I was gonna say Dead Rising as well. Dead Rising had a huge focus on like, we just have an insane number of enemies of zombies on screen, and you can just chainsaw straight through them.
Yeah.
It also killed a bunch of launch Xbox 360s.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
I missed that.
And yeah, I think I was getting confused for a second there because I'm like, oh yeah, those were about the same era. But I think Thousand Year Door was maybe late GameCube, and Dead Rising was early 360. So they were like
360 launched early in its generation, so they might have been released around the same time.
Yeah, but it seems like no one like it doesn't seem like developers are really looking at doing that.
Very few and far between. One of the kind of weird examples, again with zombies, was Days Gone for the PS4, where they were pretty much the entire game was they were touting like, look at how many zombies we got, like, and we put extra technology in them to make them like kind of swarm around in interesting ways, and like the crowd stuff, it did look pretty good for a video game. It's just, the problem is that I don't think many people cared. Whatever. Some people like that game. It didn't look interesting to me because I don't care about zombies.
Yeah, but in
I don't care about zombies and Sons of Anarchy, which is basically what that game was.
Yeah, but in general, I think there's definitely a lot of games where actually people have the complaint that like, oh yeah, no, the game just feels empty because there's not a lot going on. I remember actually, I haven't played Cyberpunk, but I know this was one of the things that people mentioned about Cyberpunk is that it feels kind of weirdly sparsely populated. Maybe Sean can comment on that.
Except for when you do something bad and the police come. Then there's a surprising amount of police in no time at all.
But I think
that feels very appropriate.
That feels about right, although the hardware limitations are clearly in play with Cyberpunk.
I mean,
by the way, I will comment one.
But that's part of the problem, right? Like a lot of developers, big developers, are all focused on making things so shiny that you can't. Very shiny in the case of Cyberpunk with ray tracing. But you don't have the actual like you don't have the hardware budget left to render huge numbers of enemies. And then indie games just like are more focused, I think, on concept more than just like, just big numbers.
Yeah. So I'd like to just do a shout out to Cyberpunk Edge Runners for accurately describing how incredibly crazy the driving physics are. There's
Oh, I
several
heard about
scenes
this.
in the series where they're driving, and the main character has a device which lets him live at basically like 10 times speed. And so you just see the vehicle bouncing around exactly as it would in the game, and him being an absolutely terrible driver. And the physics of this driving look bonkers. Like you think, okay, this is some anime level shit. And then you play the actual game and you're like, they're just parroting what's happening in the game. It's great. It's great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
So basically, now is the time for a sprite-based Dynasty Warriors game.
Oh man. Yeah, Dynasty Warriors got away with having tons and tons of enemies on screen because they didn't do anything. Seriously, you can walk up to a group of enemies and just stand there, and like a lot of them just won't even attack you. Like it's a complete illusion. Those games.
You might get like the odd one just trying to take a poke at you, but
Yeah,
that's they're just plow through large enemies or large piles of enemies. That's the entire point of those games.
Yep.
Maybe it's just like, okay, we're just going to select a random subset of the enemies and they get AI this frame. Everyone else does nothing. There's no CPU budget left.
Yeah, only a few enemies possess the think function. That was one of my favorite things about when Valve made the Dota 2 AI open source because they didn't want to program it themselves. So they said, community, you do it. I took a look at it, and like the main function was think. Where it would think every cycle or whatever. It's like that's just funny naming to me, but it makes sense.
Clever use of that, and you end up getting a game like Lemmings, where they all start walking off
I
the
don't
cliff.
think those lemmings are thinking all that hard.
They don't think, they just do.
Yeah. Don't think, feel. All right. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Vampire Survivors. You should pick it up if you are interested.
You should sink your teeth into it.
There we go. You should be on their marketing team.
No, that doesn't work though.
Dude, seriously,
You have to be a vampire.
The bestiary entries
There's no
sound like
vampires.
Sean wrote them, okay? There's so many puns.
Okay. It is time to talk about the one game I've been playing far too much of right now. And unbelievably, it's no longer Noita.
I don't believe you. You were playing Noita like on
At 3 a.m. last night. And let me
2
tell
nights
you,
ago.
it was great.
I saw you playing Noita 2 nights ago, and then you were also playing Noita last night.
That's right. But what I
Will
play
he be
more
playing Noita tonight? Possibly.
You're very prescient. So chess is the game that I've been playing. And so when I went to Toronto, I went to this fantastic little board games place off of, I don't know, because I got to it by going underground. And let me tell you, GPS doesn't exist in Toronto's subway systems, and you quickly become completely lost. But anyways, they had many different variations of chess. Which if you've played classic chess before, you know what this is all about. But then when you get into the variants, things start to get really crazy. So there's variants that are more like physical variants of the game, where you're actually going to be playing it in person, and then there's the variants that you can play online. I'm going to save my favorite variant for last. I'm going to first talk about the variant that I tried that made me want to pull my hair out. This is called Sovereign Chess. And in Sovereign Chess, there are many different colors of chess pieces on the board. And it looks a little bit like a Scrabble board because there are different colored squares.
Oh
And
no.
let me tell you, there was a video online explaining how to play it, which I had to pull up in order to be able to play it because the instructions just didn't quite do it for me. Perhaps my brain was not able to comprehend these mere instructions written down. It's like some Cthulhu-like language making me lose my mind. And so the guy starts out with saying on this video that sovereign chess is like real chess. Or is like normal chess, except with these differences. And the first comment and the highest comment of this video is, no, it is not. At the end of the day, many people found it to be quite entertaining, but the general concept here is that when you're playing a variant of chess, consider how much more complicated it's making the game. If it's making it so complicated that you need a YouTube video to play it, I would recommend that you steer away from this. Because what's happening here is when you move a piece onto a colored square, you gain control of all the pieces of that color. And you can also swap your king for a piece of another color that you can control. And already the game is already getting out of control. Santo's brow is furrowing. It gets very complicated very quickly. Yes. It is complete madness, and I don't know how it's so popular. So if you play Sovereign Chess and you enjoy it, let me tell you, you are a very rare bird. Now, let's go on to the variants of chess that I enjoyed the most is one where you're changing the dimensions of the board. I found circular chess to be very fun. And that's literally, well, they shouldn't really call it circular chess. I think they should call it donut chess because, yes, the board becomes a donut and your non-pawn pieces are kind of backs against each other. Your pawns are to the side and you're going around in a circle and it is hella fun. that was honestly, it was pretty great.
Donut maps are great. Donut is one of my favorite Civ maps.
Yes. Now, if you want to amp it up one more dimension, you can go from circular chess to spherical chess, where the chessboard is a globe. And this one is kind of basically normal chess with a few little differences here and there, but it's very fun and very hectic. And one of the most fun things to do is just endlessly spin this globe and be like, all right, how screwed am I right now?
I'm assuming the pieces are magnetic.
They are magnetic, yes.
Yeah. Bishop sounds like it would be extremely powerful.
Yes.
in globe chess.
And
the queen, of course.
Yes.
But like the diagonal move seems like it would be like sort of difficult to see on a sphere.
Yeah, you can pull some sneaky things with your diagonal pieces there. Now moving away from the physical but along the dimensional, one of my favorites that I was just doing some research about, I didn't get the chance to truly play this with a human, infinite chess, where you start on the normal chessboard, but the board itself expands infinitely, and your pieces can dart off in just about any direction. And there's a lot of chess theory that goes into this, and figuring out how quickly you can end the game despite there being an infinite playfield for you to navigate on. That one was also, it was fun to learn about because there was just a lot of math and theory behind it. But if you're looking for anything that takes a short amount of time and doesn't make you start nosebleeding from all the thinking you're doing, might want to stay away from that one. Now, speaking of nosebleed, I'm going to go to the most complicated variant of all, and that is 5-dimensional chess.
Yep.
And
with time travel.
Holy Christ on a cracker. No amount of explaining the rules will help you figure out how to play this game. In fact, no amount of playing the game will help you figure out how to play this game. You will become hopelessly lost. Grandmasters who play chess have a fun time losing their minds at this game.
Yeah, we were talking about inappropriate tags on Steam earlier, and 5D dimensional chess with time travel has the tag psychological horror on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So essentially, yeah, your pieces can time travel, and when they time travel, they create parallel realities, and all you need to do is win on any one of these parallel realities. And pieces can travel between those realities in a way that will quickly destroy your own sense of reality. Um, I remember trying it, and I both lost and won unexpectedly. So it's a little bit like Schrodinger's game. You know, your ability to win and lose is superimposed upon observation, I would say. Now, let me skip to the top variant that I would recommend. And there's a chess player on YouTube. You can watch him play it, and you'll see why it's so fun. It's called duck chess.
Duck
And
chess?
it's duck chess. It's a real quack. So there is a duck piece, and on each player's turn, you start by moving the duck. And this is very important because nobody got shit on this duck. The duck cannot be moved or cannot be interacted with in any way by normal pieces. The only way to interact with it is to move it. And so there is just a absolute constant bondugery of determining your opponent's best possible move and plunking this duck around so they switch the D to an F and scream very loudly at you and be like, God damn it, that was my only good move.
So the duck's just a physical obstruction on the board?
That's right. A movable physical obstruction.
Wow, I can't believe they turned chess into a cover shooter.
They did. And it's astoundingly fun. And you can play this variant online easily if you go to any online platforms, and definitely worth the time. It makes it fun because anyone who's even a beginner at chess will understand, you know, what is the biggest threat here, and how can I use this duck to absolutely make my opponent start swearing at me. Online, watching grandmasters play against each other, you can actually watch their veins pop out of their heads. It's pretty great.
Sean, you should get into combat chess.
Yes.
Where, you know, you determine the game on the battlefield and the battlefield. Where you throw hands.
Oh, yeah. Now, one thing that I noticed is when I looked at the history of computerized chess, there's a lot of chess games that actually did exactly that. Well, mostly it was just crazy animations. So, you know, the chess pieces, as they're moving across the board, you know, the queen would whip out like a flamethrower or curb stomp her opponent with her high heels, or whatever crazy animation that the animators could think of using the technology at the time. Definitely, it makes the game longer whenever they have these animations thrown in, but very entertaining to see how the most simple of games could be massively blown up in animation budget and time spent developing such a simple game. I would say that one of the things that really got me hooked on trying to become better at chess is actually how useful chess theories are at other areas of your life. There's been many a time that I've been having a debate with someone in my life, or negotiating something in the workplace, or with a customer service agent who's being difficult, and one of the various chess tactics or strategies will pop into my head at that moment and inspire me to say or do something that will move things along in a much better direction. So, yeah, I would say that even if you are not an expert at chess, if you like it even in the slightest, go ahead and look up the chess tactics, and do some introspection on how they might apply to common areas of your life. Things like the fork, the spear, the uh, of course, now that I want to talk about them, they all fly out of my head.
Yeah, move over, Sun Tzu.
Speaking of
You've been
flying,
replaced.
I just had an idea for a chess variant.
Tell me, let's hear it.
So it's time chess, but if either player runs out of time on their clock, a swarm of moths is unleashed, and whatever pieces get knocked over are gone.
Oh man.
Oh.
That one hits deep. That one hits deep.
Yeah, so so speaking of chess as a shooter,
Yep.
I've been playing a game called Shotgun King: The Final Checkmate. Now, the lore of the game, if you care about the literal 5 seconds of lore this game has, is that you play as the Black King, and all your subjects left you because you're a terrible despotic ruler, and the White King is a peaceful. The White King is a benevolent, good king, and so all your pieces left for the White Kingdom, and you pick up and you're mad about it, so you pick up your trusty shotgun and go on a rampage to destroy all of the White pieces and White King. Sort of a silly setup. It's pretty much just an excuse for a 1v all shotgun showdown. So you play as a king piece. So initially your movement is just that of a king, except you, instead of capturing pieces, you just have a shotgun. And all the opposing pieces have health. It's like, I think a pawn has three health or something, but then the king has quite a bit more health. Queens have 5 health. Rooks have 5. So the pieces are stronger in different ways as well. Like knights so there's a turn counter. Knights move every other turn, so they move quick. But something like a rook does not move every other turn. Pawns don't move every other turn, although they can, because the thing is the game starts out pretty simply, but it's set up with 2 modes. There's endless mode, and then there's the throne mode. Throne mode, you're trying to retake your throne, which is 12 levels that you have to beat, and then the 12th final level is sort of a special level because you face off against a gigantic White King that takes up 8 squares of the board or something.
A novelty-sized king.
Novelty-sized king, yeah. And every floor you clear, you get 1 upgrade and 1 sort of downgrade. Or rather, you get an upgrade and white gets an upgrade. So the upgrades might be extra range for your shotgun or extra damage for your shotgun. Or they might be things like you get to hold more souls. And what a soul is that when you kill a non-pawn piece, you actually get that piece's soul, which gives you the ability to move like that piece. So if you kill a knight, you now have a knight soul, and you can move like a knight would instead of like the king, which is really, really important for getting out of jams, especially as you get later into the game, because like I said, each floor you clear, you get an upgrade, but so does white. Now, a lot of those are extra pieces for white, but a lot of them also give extra abilities. So, for example, there might be one that now means that pawns can move in all 4 directions, which, if there's a lot of pawns, is an absolute nightmare. If there's a lot of pawns as well, there's things that reduce the turn timer so that units move faster. You might end up in a situation where white has 3 queens on the board, base. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that ends up getting really, really dangerous. And then on the harder difficulties, you lose some of the abilities that help you. On normal, you get 2 shells in the chamber of your shotgun. On hard, you get 1. On very hard, you don't get souls anymore by default. You only can get the soul ability via an upgrade from clearing a level. So there's a lot of like kind of cool upgrades and sort of enemy upgrades, and they kind of synergize in interesting ways too. Like there's one upgrade where you get an extra turn if you kill a knight, but there's upgrades for white that give white more knights. So it's actually, if you get the upgrade that gives you extra turns on knight kills, but then white has more knights, it kind of like lets you do things a little. It's a bit easier in that sense. So I like the way it plays with this trade-off thing of, oh, and you get to choose between 2 sets of upgrade, downgrade sort of thing. So it's a fairly simple game. Other than the fact that it's basically got upgrades, it's still basically just chess with a shotgun, a weird turn system, and upgrades. It's really, really fun though. Like if you like chess, it's worth it. I think it's worth trying. It's super weird, but it's actually quite fun. Also, I find that I like to play it really fast, and I'm always making really dumb mistakes that I would never make during an actual chess game.
What I learned from watching you play this is that I should play you in speed chess sometime, because I have a feeling I might do well.
Yeah.
Like,
oh
way, god. Yeah, go ahead, John.
So in Shotgun King, if I'm correct, multiple pieces can move on white side, or is it only one at a time?
So the way it works is that every piece on the white side has a cooldown of their sort of like turn. So, for example, the knights have a 2-turn cooldown, and when the cooldown like reaches 0 or I can't remember if it increases or decreases, but when the cooldown like fills or empties or whatever it's doing, they move. And so every single knight will move every other turn. Now they don't all move in sync though. I think it just like kind of randomizes how full each piece's movement gauge is. But you can be in a situation where like the white has like 12 pieces on the board and 8 of them are moving on one turn. If, they just happened to fill up their meter all at once, which does happen, and it can be quite bad for you, because if you have the opponent moving, say, like 2 rooks and a bishop in the same turn, or maybe a queen in there as well, it like the AI like intentionally just tries to spread out the pieces to just try and checkmate you. Like it does a pretty good job at doing that as well if there's a lot of pieces.
Yeah, and
I've sometimes made. Oh,
yeah, it's important to mention the lose condition, like how you get checkmated, is if you get put into check and you end your turn still in check, you'll lose. So there's a couple fun things about this, where if you're only being checked by a single piece, you can try to shoot that piece to get yourself out of check. And, it's a shotgun, it has a spread, so that's not always guaranteed unless the piece is like right next to you. But
the spread's like really, and the spread's pretty fun because there's upgrades that affect the spread. So there's upgrades that narrow the spread and upgrades that widen the spread. And depending on how much damage you do, the way that damage actually works is that every point of damage is an extra bullet coming out of the shotgun. So if you have lots of damage, high spread can actually be good.
Yeah, it's a fun dynamic. And one other thing, this is what I was saying, what Alex was saying when sometimes he plays too fast, is that if you shoot a piece and destroy it, and destroying that piece would put you into check. Like if there's a rook behind a pawn, for example, that's a checkmate. So you gotta be you gotta be careful where you're shooting.
Especially on level 1, I lose the first level way more often than I lose the second level, because the first level's so easy that I just try to speed through it, and sometimes I'm just not paying attention and I shoot the pawn in front of the rook while I'm in that column, and I just get bodied. But yeah, like I was saying, with all the pieces moving at once, a common mistake I've made is I'll get the upgrade that gives me extra turns on killing knights, and then I'll take extra knights. But if you're playing on hard or above and you have only one shell in the chamber, it takes a turn to reload the chamber. Now you can move and reload. Movements automatically reload your weapon, but I've made this mistake multiple times where I take extra knights because I'm like, oh, I get free turns. This is great. And then like 4 knights just move at once all around me, and I just can't get out of it. Especially if there's a rook or a bishop around, because then it's really, really easy for the AI to just lock you down into a checkmate.
Yeah.
Unless you have the souls, which is why the souls are so critical. But yeah, I've gotten to the very hard difficulty where you don't start with souls, and it's way harder without the soul ability.
Yeah, and I like some of the abilities too. Some of them are pretty inventive, like the moat that gets set up in the middle of the field where the opponent's pieces like have to spend a turn in the moat to get through, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then the ability to pick up enemy pieces and throw them around.
Yeah, oh man, that's probably my favorite. That's probably my favorite ability. So there's this ability, and you can pick up any piece that's beside you, and then you can actually move while carrying the piece. And then instead of shooting, your next attack is to literally just throw the piece at another piece. And you can potentially kill the piece that you throw and the piece that gets hit.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I think it also stuns the pieces too, so they don't it like resets their turn counter or something. So I've used that. That one's actually really good because it can get you out of a jam, because you can end up actually taking out 2 pieces when you're kind of cornered. I think it does damage proportional to the amount of health that the unit has, though. So like throwing a pawn is not as powerful as throwing a rook.
Yeah.
And I've made the mistake where I've thrown a unit. I've thrown a piece at like a queen to try and take out the queen, and then it's just made it worse. And then I lost.
Should have thrown the queen instead.
I couldn't throw the queen. The queen wasn't beside me.
Now,
so yeah.
Does how far you can throw the piece matter based on what piece they are?
I don't think so. I haven't noticed that. It seems like throwing is basically the same. Again, the only difference between pieces seems to be that pieces with more health do more damage to other pieces. Yeah, there's some fun ones. There's some really, really dangerous ones too. Like there's one that makes pawns able to attack the 2 spaces in front of them, as well as the diagonals that they normally have, which makes the pawns extremely dangerous. And then they get little spears to show you that they have that ability. Oh, there's also a grenade. The grenade's hilarious. The grenade is very damaging and also very, very unpredictable.
It bounces around crazy, right?
It bounces, yeah.
It's like the banana bomb in Worms.
Yeah, you can potentially take out a whole bunch of pieces at once, but I've never actually done well when I take the grenade.
There might be some correlation there.
The RNG is here for you. Psych.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to use. But yeah, I highly recommend it. I think I saw that they're still, I think it's still in early access. So There's apparently a big update coming soon with some new features. It would be really I really like what they did with it because it's fundamentally like a fairly small game. Like there's not really that much to it, but what they've got is pretty tightly focused and it plays like a dream. They came up with a concept and they pretty much executed perfectly on that concept. Which is exactly what I love to see in like a little indie game like that.
Nice. Now, if we want to talk about a game where they didn't execute on the concept, it's time for me to rant. Okay, so I'm a long-suffering video game fan where a lot of my favorite franchises are either having some pretty rough entries put into them, in my opinion, or just aren't getting made anymore. One of the key players in this is Monster Rancher. There hasn't really been a Monster Rancher game in forever. I think the last Monster Rancher game before this year was a mobile game in like 2014 maybe, and before that even like another like years long span between them. So they announced 2 Monster Rancher games for this year, so it's the year of the Monster Rancher. One of them is another mobile game. That's through the Line messaging / gaming service in Japan, which I have zero hopes of ever showing up here. So I'm just going to put that one out of my mind. But the Monster Rancher game that they did announce that was coming to North America was Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher. Now, this is a Monster Rancher game that focuses on the various kaiju in the Ultraman universe, which Ultraman is an extremely popular kaiju series in Japan, and it shows. I can't really begrudge Koei Tecmo for making this crossover because, like, apparently it's sold quite well in Japan. It was like the 3rd best-selling physical release of that week. Like, Persona 5 Royal came out the same week, and it sold about half as much as that, like the Switch version of Persona 5 Royal. So that's fairly impressive. I don't know about the digital numbers, but seems like at least a fair amount of people are into this. And like in the Monster Rancher community, like the Discords or whatever, people seem pretty high on this game. I wasn't gonna pick it up because I don't give a damn about kaiju. I have a pretty big bias against them. I just don't care. Like it's the funny thing of like, you remember when the Godzilla reboot happened like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever. And most people, when they talked about that movie, it's like, oh, you gotta hear it. You gotta hear, Godzilla's like shriek with like the crazy speakers or whatever. And it's just like, but is the movie good? Like, people were talking about that moment more than if the movie was actually good or not. So it's like, whatever.
But think of the Foley artists.
Yeah, think of the poor sound engineers that had to make that sound good. The people that had to hear that over and over again while they were editing that part of the movie, and their poor eardrums. So I was kind of like lukewarm on picking it up, in part because of my bias, but people seem to like it, so I did pick it up. I actually streamed about it for about 6 hours, and okay, well, I'll start with what I like about the game first. I think that they did a really good job at making this game mostly like Monster Rancher 2. Monster Rancher 2 is the mostly agreed upon best game in the series, and it's my favorite in the series, so it's very similar to that, to the point where they're even using sound effects from the original PS1 game. The game, it does feel authentic, and I'm not the person to be able to judge this, but they put in a lot of like the kaiju cries and shrieks, and they, sound just as grating as I think they do, and they do it a lot. And they do a few interesting mechanics, like instead of having, training drills that you have training drills that you do, but in certain locations. And by doing a drill over and over again in particular locations, that location becomes your kaiju's territory. And so they get like extra bonuses for training there. So it kind of has this like territorial nature to, these gigantic monsters, which is kind of interesting. And sometimes enemy kaiju will try and like jump into those areas to kind of take over your territory, reduce your territory score there, and so you have to fight them out, which is pretty interesting. It varies things up a little bit. As well, like the kaijus will get tired of training in certain territories, so you gotta spread them out a little bit more too. The game incentivizes you to try different things to break up the repetitiveness of it. However, it's the repetitiveness of it I think it's its biggest flaw. Monster Rancher is a game of repetition. Like, basically, you generate a monster and you have about 300 to 400 or whatever in-game weeks of just raising your stats and battling. So you're doing the same thing essentially every single week, every single of these time increments over and over and over again. So if you make that flow bad, that's really rough. Like, that's what I liked about, the original Monster Rancher 2 is that it pretty easily put me into a flow state where I was, doing these drills, seeing these stats go up, and it was pretty satisfying. But in this game, there is just a little bit too much, like, in the way of all that. Like, every week you get, like, 2 to 3, boxes of dialogue that say some generic stuff about, the weather or the time of year and how your kaiju's reacting to it. It has no gameplay purpose whatsoever. But, you start seeing repetition of those after like the first year, and that means that that's an extra, 3 dialogue boxes that you have to click through every week of your, my first kaiju lasted 200 weeks. So that meant that those were 600 dialogue boxes I had to press through over this kaiju's lifetime. And it's like, you can't be putting stuff like that in a game where you're doing this repetitive action so many times, because it's just going to be grating. There's a fast forward button that fast forwards through dialogue. However, it resets every so often, like really quickly. Like, you can't just turn on fast forward and have it on all the time. You have to turn it on and it'll fast forward through that chunk of dialogue, which doesn't help all that much, honestly. They did weird things where, this is a really big nitpick, but where you can skip the kaiju's training drill animation. Still takes a little bit too long for like the animation part of it. But then when it shows you like the stat increases, those disappear really quickly. And I want to see those. That's the entire point of me doing these drills. If I'm going to spend any time waiting on information, that's the information that I want to wait on. See what increased, how big, and where I ended up. Because that's important for starting out. Like, I want to know, be able to pick up really quickly, like what my kaiju's good at and what's not. So that's, something that I didn't really like. Okay, a couple other things I did like, though, is that the Monster Rancher games have usually had some kind of trait system where you can staple on different things onto your monster that are outside of its techs and stats. Where sometimes, a lot of the times, they're things that activate during battle under certain circumstances. And this game has a trait system where you basically generate items that have these traits. And you can like slap them onto your monster. Each monster has an inherent trait, and then you can slap 3 onto them, which is nice. That some other Monster Rancher games give traits to you randomly, whereas this one gives you them randomly, but then gives you the choice of what you get. So I think that's a much better way of doing it than just giving them to you randomly. It really lets you, specialize your monster and or your kaiju in a few extra ways. I'm making the distinction between monster and kaiju because they do that in the game, because this somehow canonically takes place in the same, world as regular ass Monster Rancher, which yeah, Sean?
Question.
Yeah.
Do we see the kaiju that are like? Would you end up seeing Godzilla in this game, or any other ones we see in the movies?
So no, this is specifically kaiju related to the Ultraman universe, of which the only one that I've heard of before is Gamora, which is a Godzilla-esque looking like big dinosaur guy with like a kind of a crescent horn on him. Everything else except for Ultraman itself, I've never heard of.
Gotcha.
So and I'm more familiar with stuff in the Godzilla universe, like Godzilla, Mothra, Space Godzilla, that kind of stuff.
Mecha Godzilla.
Exactly. Yeah.
King Ghidorah.
Mm-hmm. So.
Gojira.
The only other two kaiju that I recognized in this game were Suezo and Mochi, which made cameo appearances. They put a couple Monster Rancher monsters in this. So there's
Suezo can beat Godzilla in a fight. Suezo OP.
I mean, these are giganto-sized Suezos, so they're just as big as these other kaiju.
So the lore now, Suezo just never stops growing.
Yeah.
Ancient Suezo become our kaiju. Just they're so big. They're like lobsters. Like they don't die. They just keep getting bigger. Or eaten.
Okay. A couple other things that are nice. This game, it does a lot of the stuff that Monster Rancher 2 does in terms of monster techs, but it gives you the option on whether to turn techs off completely and not have them in your kaiju's loadout, which is a really smart change for when your kaiju's battling AI versus AI, which doesn't happen very often in game, but that's how tournaments are run. They're always run AI versus AI. And there's some monsters in Monster Rancher 2 that are horrible because their starting techs are bad, or they're a monster that specializes in intelligence attacks, but they have a couple power attacks that you can't get rid of. So that's a very smart thing that they added to make tournaments run a bit smoother. Though they added another thing that makes tournaments run way less smooth, which is you can't search monsters online unless you've already unlocked them. Which sucked because there was this one guy, Moose Bones, whose tournaments, he's really good at running tournaments, so check his stream if you're interested in Monster Rancher, but he wanted to run a tournament really soon after launch, and then found out the hard way that he couldn't search out some entrance, so that really sucked, and I don't know why they did that. Okay, now time for me to rant about this. So, they did a really good job at making a game called Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher that feels like a Kaiju Monster Rancher. Because kaiju are, these big, slow, lumbering creatures. And that's exactly how this game performs. Slow and lumbering.
Oh no.
I don't know why this game performs as badly as it does. Because nothing in it is anything that the Switch shouldn't be able to handle. I should also mention this is a Switch exclusive, so there's no PC version. At least as of yet. Maybe they'll make one, I don't know.
I mean, that makes performance problems even more unforgivable.
If they're only targeting one platform, yes, I agree.
Yeah. If it's ported to multiple platforms and one of the platforms doesn't get as much development time, it's annoying but understandable. If it's on one platform, what the hell happened?
Maybe they're rendering the full anatomy of a kaiju,
No, they're not. All right, because when it comes to 3D models and textures, you got your 3D model, you put your texture on top of it. Now, what a lot of places do is a technique called bump mapping, which is where your texture that you put on your model is textured in a way to make it look like it has more depth to certain parts of the model than it actually has. for example, scars on facial textures, for example. They're not necessarily modeling extra vertexes in the polygons to make like a divot for a scar. They're just texturing it in a way that makes it look like there's depth there. That's why it's called bump mapping. And that's basically what they did for a lot of these kaiju, which is messed up because Monster Rancher has always been one of its key components is being able to fuse monsters together and have, the result of that have, be the main skeleton and model of the first monster with elements of the second. Now, in the older, even in the older PS1 games, they actually changed the models, sometimes in fairly significant ways. This is why I love Monster Rancher 4 so much, is because a lot of the models are very different. That's why I don't like Monster Rancher Advance 2 and 1, because all the differences are palette swaps. There's no model changes whatsoever. So that makes the monsters have way more personality, in my opinion, way different. It makes me feel a lot better about raising one Suezo that looks one way and another Suezo that looks another way, because there's more tangible differences between them. With these kaiju combinations or whatever, they just slap different textures on them. As far as I can tell, the models aren't really changing all that much. So I don't know why everything's so low performant. Like, if there's no model variation, then there's less models that they have to have. And like in battle, like some attacks will just like start causing frame rate dips. On Ranch, stuff will start causing frame rate dips. Like, there's constant frame rate dips in a game that, like, again, it's weird to me to see games that run worse than, their PS1 counterparts a long time ago. I know about the PS1. The PS1 wasn't actually a great system when it came to tech. Like, go and watch some original PS1 footage and see how much those polygons are swimming around and how many seams pop up. It's not a great system, but it performed better in some cases than these new games do. It's really messed up, and it makes it feel more slow than it even is. Like, I already talked about the repetition in terms of just too much stuff happens every week that you have to button through to make the game flow. That having frame rate dips on top of that, it made me really, really, really annoyed playing this game. And the battles also feel slower. The attack animations are a fair bit slower because, again, these are big, slow, lumbering kaiju. And because these kaiju are all based off of, defined IP, defined property, I feel like there's a lot less variation in them. Like in Monster Rancher, you had this like cool, like crab lobster. You've got whatever the hell Suezo is. You have like, a ghost, a reanimated tree, like a lot of different shapes and sizes for these monsters. Like, you could have a tiny pixie and a big ass golem. But in this game, all the monsters are about the same size. Pretty much all of them are bipedal. There's a lot of ones that are mostly lizards. So there's less variety there. And I didn't really get too attached to the kaiju I was raising or any of the kaiju that I saw all that much. There were a couple ones that looked kind of cool looking, but for the most part, I was pretty tepid on them. So if I'm not attached to the actual monsters themselves, if I'm not attached to the actual gameplay, then I'm not attached to this game at all. Like, that's one thing I'll give, like, something like Pokemon Shield, where I wasn't attached to the pacing or the gameplay or the story or anything like that, but I still had a good time discovering the new Pokemon and building a team. So, I'd say it's a better game than this one, even though Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher is way more interesting mechanically, but I just don't care. And, okay. I got one more thing I gotta bring up about this game, and it's something that threw me for a loop. Now, you all don't have to deal with this, because all of you have common names. Sean, Alex, Matt. I know so many people that are called Sean, Alex, and Matt. The only other people that I know named Santo are people in my immediate family. All right? So I don't get video game characters named Santo ever. All right? So whenever I hear the name or see the word, it like kind of throws me a little bit because I think it's about me. Maybe that's extremely egocentric or whatever, but I'm going to base it off of the fact that I don't have a particularly common name. So, of course, the one video game that shows up with a character named Santo is fucking Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher, where the guy who runs the Kaiju Shrine is named Santo. And it's just like, the first time it showed up, like, you don't see the portrait of the guy. It's like, oh, hello, Santo. I'm like, what's going on here? I don't think I put... Did I put my name into the Switch? I know I named my Rancher character something different. What's going on here?
Is there some Psycho Mantis going on?
I know, right?
The game knows you too well.
Yeah. I see you like Fire Emblem. I was curious about this, so I looked, and this is how like not showing up the name Santo is. There's not a single trainer in any Pokemon game that's named Santo. Think about that for a second. Think about how many Pokemon games there are and how many trainers there are per Pokemon game. Not a single one. There's a Santos in one of the battle towers, but
maybe if we ever get a Italy region.
Yeah, the only Santo I get in Pokemon is there's this one like Great British Bake Off looking jabroni in one of the episodes who owns a Mime Jr. as his only Pokemon named Santo. I was just like, come on. Talk about representation. I got zero representation in my name in these video games. So if there's any game developers here, reach out of the box with your names. Don't just go with Bible names, damn it. And as I want to do, I forgot to talk about something. I take notes, all right? I take notes for these podcasts and then forget to talk about some of these notes sometimes. I do have to talk about one of the ways that you can generate monsters in this game. Because they put in the CD database from Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX, but only in the Japanese version for whatever reason.
What?
They didn't put it in the English version. I don't know why.
Why not? That's bullshit.
I have no idea. But so they put in a password, like keyword system, like they have had in the advanced games and the DS games. But they also let you generate kaiju from NFC enabled things. Except for amiibos. Those don't work.
What?
Yes, this Nintendo Switch exclusive thing doesn't work with amiibos. Oh, probably because they would have had to get Nintendo approval, is my guess. Like maybe, amiibo stuff, like you can only get Nintendo things from amiibos. I don't know. I don't know a lot about third-party amiibo support. Like the most I know is in Skyrim, and you get amiibos and you get Nintendo stuff from that. So,
I mean, I know that third party, like you don't need proprietary code or anything like that to read the Nintendo amiibo NFCs.
Yeah.
I've read some NFCs on my phone. I was just messing around with it.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that, but that's actually the reason for that is that
I mean, they're probably it's probably that they're concerned that like they don't want Nintendo. Like Nintendo's so litigious that I wouldn't put it past some company to be worried. Like, oh, if we put amiibo support in, Nintendo might be upset if it doesn't like lead to actual Nintendo properties.
Yeah.
How has Nintendo not made their own version of Skylanders with amiibo support?
I know, that's what I thought was going to happen. That's because Smash? I don't know. That doesn't count.
All roads lead to IP.
Yeah. The amiibos have always been like weirdly neglected.
Oh, Nintendo implemented something that got weirdly neglected.
Yeah, no, what a surprise.
Hey. Like online multiplayer and experience.
Remember the vitality sensor?
No.
No.
Exactly.
I remember.
I don't even remember what console that was.
Wii. That was for the Wii.
That was for the Wii?
Yeah.
What? Jeez, I thought it was going to be like DSi or something. I'm like,
they showed They showed it at E3 and then it just never came to fruition.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, but the reason why this game uses NFC stuff is that actually there's like a bunch of NFC based Ultraman stuff in Japan. And so like some of that stuff actually will get, I'm pretty sure, I haven't actually verified this, but it should give you like the same stuff. Like if you put like, some kind of NFC figure that has a Scavenger on it, you'll get a Scavenger in game.
is this Ultraman universe like really popular in Japan or something?
It's extremely popular in Japan.
This like this
Ultraman is like the original Japanese superhero.
I kind of like have to wonder if maybe this is just sort of like just a shameless cash in.
I wouldn't say it's shameless because, like I said, I do think that they did a. Again, I can't like be an expert on this, but it feels like they, did things authentically.
Bit of a rushed cash in, maybe. I mean, the performance issues
well,
especially sound like the game just got rushed out the door.
Yeah, it's like a niche thing. Like
I
Monster Rancher itself has also always been a lot more popular in Japan than any other part of the world. So this, like I said, this makes complete sense why they did this. I'm just worried that they might continue to go down this route instead of making proper ass Monster Rancher games.
Come on, man. Common Rancher.
That's just Pokemon now. They're putting you on a motorcycle.
Pokemon Rancher.
They decided to be like, okay, Kamen Rider and Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. That's our inspiration for this gen.
Okay, small tangent here about Nintendo, their origins, and this amiibo thing. So amiibos, if I'm correct, basically run off NFC here, right?
Yeah.
Yep,
So my
correct.
question is, if Nintendo started as a trading card company, why did they not make trading card amiibos, like official
They
ones?
did.
They did.
There's a whole set of Animal Crossing amiibo cards.
Actually, they were making
And-
cards even before that because they had a literal card reader for the GBA that was, I think, magnetic
Yeah.
stripe.
And I believe if you got a launch copy of...
They've been trying. You just haven't been buying.
Yeah, I think if you got a launch copy of Pokken, you got a Shadow Mewtwo amiibo card, which would just allow you to use him early in the game, because if you beat it, you just unlock him anyways.
Yeah, okay.
My mind has been blown.
Yeah.
No, go back to their roots, make some NFC Hanafuda cards.
Yeah. So, okay, that's mostly what I have to say about Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher. So, I think if you like Ultraman, I think this is a good. I think you should buy this game just because it'll expose you to Monster Rancher as well, and it seems alright. If you like Monster Rancher, you'll probably like this game. If you're more patient than I am, basically. I don't know. I'm getting cranky and impatient in my older age here. Older age. I'm 31. Where like I've always considered myself a very patient person, but lately these days, when it comes to entertainment, I'm getting really impatient about stuff now.
I mean, companies should just be releasing like polished products.
Yes, they should.
That's like, but
I guarantee this game wasn't given a budget. Like the 1 and 2 remakes they've got so many things wrong with them in terms of polishing up that they could have done that they just didn't. Like I can find if I hit random, I can find monsters that are uploaded with Japanese characters in the name, but there's literally zero way for me to search for monsters using Japanese characters. I have to search via a like alphanumeric key that I would have to get from the person who uploaded the monster. So there's just weird stuff like that where they just didn't try, and like they put it in text, and this is just me ranting about Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX now, but they put in like typing text entry when you're in the shrine to generate monsters. So you can only type in using your keyboard. You can't like navigate around a thing to choose characters, but online you can only navigate around things to choose characters. You can't type in like the names of monsters that you're trying to find. So it's just a complete shit show that's going on over there. Like, they clearly, maybe there's a couple passionate people over there that care about this, but with the scope that they're setting out, with how many, models and kaiju that they had to make for this game, clearly they need more passionate people on staff and a budget. Because it just doesn't work for me. But that's partially a me problem.
We got to get those AI generated 3D models, unlimited art assets.
That's there we go. But again, like, I don't want to be too negative here, because a fair amount of people do like this, and this is a niche franchise that I believe in voting with my dollar, so I bought the damn thing. But IGN Japan gave it a 10 out of 10. I don't know why. But again, that just goes to show you that,
IGN hasn't been reliable for a very long time.
Japan's just built different. They like those mechanics that I do. So this did want me to explore a bit of a tangential topic, which is, sequels and spiritual successors. Like, what should they do? And, examples of good ones. Because there's plenty of spiritual successors that fall flat on their ass. The biggest example I can think of is Mighty Number 9.
Ukulele.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about Mighty Number 9.
Yeah, that's because that game looked awful. It looked so bad. And they did themselves no favors with the marketing for that game. That's just a game that just didn't work.
I think the game had an achievement for watching the backer credits, and it's 4 hours to go through those credits.
Oh my god.
What? That's achievement worthy.
I tuned in briefly towards the end. A streamer I watched was getting that achievement. So it was pretty much just a just chatting stream as the credits were rolling.
Oh no.
Oh,
4 hours.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think of spiritual successors that have done it right. I'm struggling a little bit because spiritual, it's a bit odd when we as an audience consider something to be a spiritual successor versus perhaps developer intent for something to be a spiritual successor. For example, would you consider Wipeout to be a spiritual successor to F-Zero? Me, maybe, but I don't know if the developers intended for that, or if they just intended it to be a fast racer franchise for PlayStation platforms, right?
I mean, given that those were kind of the Wipeout series and F-Zero were almost concurrent for a time. I don't see. I see them almost
probably not, right?
I see them more as competitors than spiritual successor.
But then you got something Fast RX, I believe that game's called. I know it's called Fast. I don't remember the letters after it, but that's clearly a spiritual successor to those games.
It's had two different names because they changed the name for the Switch version from the Wii U version. I think it's Fast Racing Neo now. There's Fast RMX and Fast Racing Neo. I forget which is which.
I was close. But yeah, this is the thing. Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher, I think, is actually a pretty good spiritual successor in that it does a lot of the stuff that the old game did with a few different spins on it, which is what I like to see out of a spiritual successor. Whereas games that just kind of crib aesthetic and don't really understand what that original game did so well, like Mighty Number 9, for example, not so much.
And the other thing is, I feel like sometimes too you can have a game that's kind of like a spiritual successor that isn't that's actually still innovating. And the game that comes to my mind, and a game I think that is quite good, is Shovel Knight. And the developers of Shovel Knight were very explicit that it was based on things like Mega Man for the NES.
They made an entire game around the down stab in Zelda 2.
Yeah. Yeah. They made, I mean, like in some ways, the game's really about that whole mechanic, but a lot of it's also really harkening back to that style of platforming. And it's obviously different. It's not a Mega Man game. You don't shoot, really. Like I guess the magic abilities kind of count.
Well, that's what I'm saying about Zelda 2, because Zelda 2 also had, town sections and, action sections. So
yeah, I guess it's kind of, yeah. In some ways, it's more of like a spiritual successor to like side-scrolling NES games as a class.
Yeah, like it's a genre game more than like a franchise successor.
Yeah. But at the same, I just pointed out because like the developers were also very clear that they're in this sort of game tradition, so to speak, and they considered it that way. And even there were like decisions around like trying to limit themselves to what the NES hardware could do that we've discussed before, and they ended up actually
cheating a little bit, but
they fudged it a little bit to make the game play better and look better, which I think is the right move.
Totally.
Like they used the limitation to get where they wanted to go, and then realized that the artificial limitation was actually holding them back in a way that they didn't need anymore. So, other like spiritual successor done right.
Yeah, I had a way harder time thinking of these than I thought I would, actually.
So, like, the closest thing that comes to my mind is Wargroove, and Wargroove is clearly an Advance Wars game.
Yes, that's a very good example.
I think it was actually kind of cool in that it did try some new things that I think work interesting, like with the sort of the crits, where different units have different crits that activate in. Like, and they're not random crits, they're based on like sort of positional things on the battlefield, which is actually an interesting idea. And it's an idea that Advance Wars had never, I think, done even anything remotely like that before.
Nope.
But a lot of what the game did was exactly the same.
Yes.
Which is fine, right? I mean, it feels like an Advance Wars game. It is a spiritual successor to Advance Wars. And I think this is where the term spiritual successor sort of like becomes more relevant, is that it's often used because the original franchise is just kind of dead.
Yep.
And I mean, I know that there's that Advance Wars 1 and 2 remake thing maybe coming out eventually, but Wargroove came out at a time when the series was completely dead in the water.
Yeah, when that wasn't even announced yet. So.
When that wasn't even announced yet, and Nintendo had never said anything about it for like 5 years or
longer.
7 years, 7, 10, I don't know. Because I suppose even today, the last Advance Wars game was just Advance Wars Days of Ruin on the DS. So that was a while ago.
That was 2 Nintendo internet store closings ago.
Yeah, but like I think what a spiritual successor needs to do right is that it needs to feel like the thing that it's doing, and that it's trying to succeed, I guess.
Not like even just that. It doesn't need to feel like it. It needs to feel how like you remember it. Is more what it has to do, I think. Because, go back and play Advance Wars 1. It's there's some things about it that aren't great. Like, so the newer units introduced in the next couple of games really helped balance it out a lot more, and some of the maps are pretty jank.
Yeah.
CO balance was extremely jank.
I mean, if you go back and play, I know Advance Wars is the only sort of series available in North American releases, but I've gone back and played some of the Japanese like Famicom Wars games, and oh man,
those are rough.
Yeah, the balance is brutal in those games. Like, it's really, really bad compared to the newer releases. But at the same time, they also had some interesting ideas. Like the one weird thing that was sort of, I think in Super Famicom Wars, they had this like pipeline.
They had the
thing.
train.
The train. That thing was weird because it was expensive, but it was busted as hell. Like it was just a super long range, super heavy hitting artillery unit, but just with like it could only move on the tracks. So
And they brought that back with the pipe runners.
yeah, the pipe runners weren't as bad though. Like,
No.
or I think the pipe runners were not so broken.
Unless there was a map where they specifically could, hang out at a spot where they could be melee attacked. Like if you messed up the pipes, making custom maps, you can make pipe runners completely OP.
But yeah, like I think the ideal spiritual successor though also does innovate in some way, because if you just make the same thing as what was made before, it's mostly just not going to actually end up being that good, because I find a lot of the time a lot of things that are quote unquote spiritual successors, like they often miss some of the sort of, I don't know, like there's something missing in especially when it's like a totally different sort of setting or something like that. Like I find it's very common that it just doesn't feel right. I don't know.
I wonder if people who, or like the outcome of a spiritual successor depends on how, what's the word that I'm thinking of? Not extreme, but how tunnel vision people have on whatever it is they're trying to channel, the spirit of the game, the mechanics. And I think that if and even just lack of innovation, like Wargroove is an amazing spiritual successor in my opinion, because it felt well balanced. It felt like they're bringing all these amazing elements into the new game. They're doing some innovations, but they haven't forsaken anything from before at the expense of trying to do something really brand new, or whatever crazy twist that a lot of developers seem to try and put.
Actually, I think in some ways, actually, Wargroove I think balanced the naval combat a bit better in that it's more affordable and actually makes it a lot more interesting and usable.
And they also put in the properties in water, which made you have to care about naval in some situations where there's plenty of Advanced Wars maps that if there was air as well as naval, I just didn't care all that much about naval. It's like, I'll just build a bunch of bombers and that'll be better.
Yeah, like they had some actually like really good ideas in Wargroove to fix some of the problems. And I think that's one of the biggest failure modes if you're trying to make a spiritual successor, is that you can get stuck, like you're saying, in tunnel vision of like, oh, this was the game, this was what it was. But the thing is that most games have problems. Even the games that are widely considered, really good, often have problems.
I've talked about Vysteria Saga in the past. That's as spiritual a successor as you can get without being slapped with a lawsuit towards old Fire Emblem games, and they took lessons from those old Fire Emblem games that are bad lessons, with like maps that are way too huge, animations that are terrible, and like a lot of very finicky things I just don't think, and older, more punishing game design that I don't think works.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, in some genres, like the genre has kind of moved on. And I think if you fail to take into account how the genre has moved on and why it moved in that direction, you're probably not gonna do very well. Like tactics games in general have gotten less punishing. Whether that's good or bad, that's the way that the genre has moved. And if you try to make a like brutally punishing tactics game, people probably aren't going to buy it.
Well,
not that that's or it's not even going to be good. I don't know, or fun.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, but and then there's also the question of just like straight up, what should a sequel do? Like, there's such a fine line with the sequel having to, stick to what the original game was versus make it fresh enough that it's actually interesting. Where, in some ways, like, I get why there's a lot of sequels that don't change enough. I pine for the days of the NES sequel. That's just almost completely different from the base game, but still somehow keeps some core elements of it still.
Zelda 2.
Zelda 2 is like one of the biggest examples, obviously. But like Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, like that started having, the Metroidvania-esque gameplay where, you moved around this big map, this big world, and, backtracked in some cases to do things that you didn't do previously. And the first Castlevania game was a straightforward action platformer, and the Castlevania 3 and 4 were straightforward action platformers. So, like, some of that stuff I kind of wish was still a thing, but you just don't get that nowadays.
Yeah, you don't get Mario 2s anymore.
I mean, no, here's the thing. You get actual Mario 2s. You get the lost levels instead of getting a reskin Doki Doki Panic.
Oh,
I want a reskin Doki Doki Panic.
We wouldn't have the Bob-omb or Bardo.
I know.
Without Doki Doki Panic.
Or Sniffits.
It's so weird.
Sniffits
needs to show up more. They don't show up enough. I love Sniffits.
Yeah.
But... And then you get stuff like,
Actually,
go ahead, Alex.
Actually, it's funny just talking about the Mario series. Like, Nintendo actually is just like constantly trying to reinvent their enemies. Like, they actually have a pretty deep like back catalog of enemies that they've had, and they keep trying to make new ones.
And like,
maybe that's good. I don't know.
Some of them make sense, but some of them just kind of suck.
Some of them seem kind of lame.
That's one of the main reasons why I don't like Super Mario World. I thought a lot of the enemies sucked. But again, that's a me problem. But like a kind of a weird example of like sequel stuff is the jump between Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Advance is a very different game than the first one, in like so many different ways. Where the first one is this like socio-political / religious epic of tale of backstabbing and a ton of different themes going on. That's dark and gritty, and well, I would say dark and gritty. I mean, people get stabbed, but it's medieval. Let's call it that. Medieval fantasy, with like some pretty deep mechanics and a lot of weird stuff going on. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is an isekai. It's about a group of what honestly look like elementary school kids, not even high school kids, getting sucked into a book that takes them to the Final Fantasy world.
And here this whole time I thought Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced was just a port to the Game Boy Advance of Final Fantasy Tactics.
No. It's very different. And they made a lot of mechanical changes that I think were like really bad. But then from there you had Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2, which they pulled in Advance Wars with it, where they made a game with Advance in the title for the DS, which that one did pretty much the same thing, but refined its mechanics in a way that's actually a much better game. So they kind of did two. They did like the weird, like they did the NES sequel and then the traditional sequel. But yeah, Final Fantasy is actually one of those series that I think does sequels really, really well because they change a ton each time. Each game in the mainline series takes place in an entirely different realm, entirely different world. They have to do their own set of world building, but they have these constants, these keystones that you can return to, like, Chocobo and the magic system and all that stuff.
Moogles.
Yeah, Moogles,
Cactar,
which have gotten more and more annoying as time has gone on. As they've gotten more and more mascot character-y. But yeah, I don't know. But I mean, sequels the other way around, I guess, where it's incremental progress, I guess are fine. Like I think about, Gears 1 to Gears 2 to Gears 3. Now, like Gears 2 introduced the Horde mode, Gears 3 perfected Horde mode. And like the campaigns for all those games are, really similar in terms of mechanics. Like not a ton changed, just like a little bit more weapons, a little more impressive set pieces and stuff like that. But that's a reasonably solid set of sequels in the modern age, I guess.
Can't speak for 4 and 5 though. Not this time.
Yeah, well, they pulled a reboot, so I have no idea what that's gonna be. It's probably gonna play the exact same as those other games.
Yep.
But yeah, like, making sequels in general, there's this tension between, if you don't change the game enough, you're just making the same game with different levels. And if you change too much, you have a pretty good chance of just making a crappy game.
Yeah.
And there is no series I can think of that has exemplified this more than Sonic. Okay, I want to be clear. I love the 2D Sonic games, but they are all basically just level packs. Like the 2D Sonic game formula is pretty much exactly the same in every one. Maybe you can play as Knuckles in one of them. That's cool. That's different. That's not a lot. That's not that much different. So the 2D Sonic games are all very, very similar, and that's fine. I like it. I like the formula, but it's not even like Sonic Mania. It's the same formula, right? There were some games on the DS like Sonic Rush, same formula. It's the same formula. It's the same game. The boss fights were 3D in that one, which was kind of weird and okay, but then you have the 3D Sonic games, which have never been able to actually. They've done so many different things, but they're almost all bad.
You got Sonic and the Black Knight. Sonic kisses a real human girl.
You got You've got Sonic. You've got Persian Sonic in the desert for some reason. There's Jurassic Park. There's Sonic with dinosaurs.
You got CG cartoon tie-in Sonic.
But also and then they've got they've got the Sonic Heroes game where they're like, yeah, you got to play 3 characters at the same time and switch between them for some reason. We didn't. Oh yeah, werewolf. You can be a werewolf. Sonic.
Werehog.
Werehog. They can't figure out. They can't figure out what works and what doesn't because they change way too much every single time.
And even oh god,
even the games that the closest I think they've gotten, I don't know. Apparently, there was a recent one that was people say is better, but I think Sonic Colors was sort of one of the better 3D Sonics, and it's because they basically just stopped fucking around with it and tried to do just there's also Shadow the Hedgehog where they're like, yeah, he's gonna get a gun. We're gonna give him a gun. Why?
Because it's edgy, man.
Oh, the gun was so stupid. It wasn't. It was actually worse. It's the complete opposite of what the gameplay is supposed to be. Because the best 3D Sonic gameplay has been when they basically just stripped it down and be like, okay, we're not gonna do weird swordplay. We're not gonna do weird robot janky third-person shooter. We're just gonna have the Hedgehog, Sonic, or Shadow, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. That game, the levels that are just Sonic and Shadow, where they're okay, just go through the level as a hedgehog, run around, collect coins, jump on enemies. Nothing weird, nothing crazy. Pretty simple actually. That was widely what most people think was the best. And then the probably best game of the 3D Sonics is Sonic Colors, where that's what the game was. It was just they didn't do all this weird stuff. And then for some reason they just keep doing too many weird things and adding too many strange mechanics and strange settings and just strange design decisions everywhere all the time.
Hearing Matt describe what Sonic Frontiers apparently is to me in the car the other day was
I know
pretty
nothing
fun.
about it. I know nothing about it. What?
I've
Give me
been
the
watching
5.
a friend play it, and I actually kind of want to check it out. He's probably going to Steam share with me so I can try it out at some point. But so all the promotional material, everyone was kind of comparing it to, oh, it's Sonic's Breath of the Wild. But it's so much more than that. It's Sonic Breath of the Wild, Shadow of the Colossus, Platinum action game, Metal
that
Gear
already-
Rising
Shadow
Revengeance.
of the
that sounds like too many things.
Well,
But also-
Sonic's a very deep character.
Okay,
You know,
even
you need all these mechanics to bring out the true nature of the Blue Hedgehog in the Jim Carrey movie.
I know nothing. I know nothing about Sonic Frontiers. But what I will say is that is yet again another dramatic change in style in the 3D Sonic games. They just can't make like the same game twice at all. And it's mostly been for the worse.
I know some people who would disagree.
Yeah.
But that actually brings up a spiritual successor I thought of. That's actually pretty well received, and that's Freedom Planet.
Yep.
Which is a spiritual successor to those classic 2D Sonic games that came out in that window between Sonic 4 and Mania.
That's a long window, in fairness.
Yeah.
And I think they actually just put out a sequel this year.
Well, there you go. Did it change too much? Did it change too little? Or did it Goldilocks it? We don't know.
I'm not entirely sure, but Steam reviews are overwhelmingly positive.
For all that's worth. All right, well.
Dude, the Pokemon, the bosses
The
look
Pokemon?
like Pokemon. The bosses look like
Pokemon.
Pokemon. I'm just looking at screenshots on Steam, and the bosses just look like legendary Pokemon, specifically. Like there's definitely like a ground Rayquaza.
Ground Rayquaza.
Yeah, dude, it's just like smooth, like green, kind of like has a jewel on its head, but it's got feet.
On Quaza? Rayquanix?
There's a legendary bird. Yeah. Anyway,
Moltecoon Trace?
Moltecoon Trace.
more like Moltro.
Is there a butter Pokemon? Can I have this legendary bird?
We can put that with the bread Pokemon that's in the next generation.
Is there actually a bread Pokemon?
Its description
Fido.
is disgusting. Its breath contains yeast.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well. All right. I think it's time to wrap up here.
Yep.
If you're interested in getting into contact with us, as always, you can email us at 3levelsdeep@outlook.com, or if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. You can also DM us on Twitter for however long that ends up staying up.
And when Twitter's gone, you can try screaming into the void. And if you yell loud enough, we might be able to hear you.
Light being the key word.
There's a non-zero chance that we might hear you.
I will guarantee that screaming into the void will be a better experience than Twitter, though.
Yeah.
Yep.
What are you talking about? I thought posting on Twitter was screaming into the void.
Oh no.
Digital void.
Is Elon gonna buy the Void next?
Oh no. Like, I purchased the void of the endless vastness of space, and I'm making it worse.
What do you think all those rockets are for?
Shit. Oh no.
Where's he going? Like, where's he going? The void.
Oh. All right. Well, yeah, as always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you another time.